Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. When you live deep in the wild like I do, you learn to listen to what others ignore. The creak of pine in the wind, the sudden hush before a predator moves, the rhythm of distant thunder that doesn't belong to any weather system nearby. At 4:13 a.m., I woke up to silence that wasn't natural. No crickets, no rustle of squirrels in the trees. Even the wind held its breath. The fire in my stone hearth had gone out during the night, and the warmth had fled the cabin like it was afraid of something. I lay there in my cot for a long moment, trying to figure out why I felt so uneasy. Then I heard it, a low, dragging shuffle just outside the window. I live about 40 miles from the nearest town, nestled in the Montana wilderness. No roads, no power lines, just forest, mountain, and me. I came out here years ago to get away from the mess of city life, and I've got enough skills and supplies to live off the land for decades if I need to, but nothing in all my survival experience prepared me for what was about to happen. I slipped out of bed and grabbed my old hunting knife from the shelf. It wasn't much against a threat I couldn't yet define, but it made me feel better. I kept low as I moved to the window and peeked through the slats. There was someone out there, half concealed by the tree line. No, not someone. Something. The figure was hunched, limbs twisted at odd angles, its head lolling slightly as if its neck couldn't quite support the weight. Its skin looked gray in the moonlight, its clothes torn and crusted with something dark. It swayed, sniffed the air, then let out a wet groan that crawled across my skin like ice. I've tracked wolves, fought off bears, even had a run-in with a mountain lion once. But this was different. This was wrong. I backed away from the window and reached for my radio. It's battery-powered and usually reliable in emergencies. I turned the dial, flipping through frequencies. Nothing, just static. That's when the screaming started. Distant at first, echoing across the ridges, the kind of screaming that makes your gut twist, raw, panicked, and entirely human. Then came another sound, a sharp series of pops, unmistakably gunfire. That meant two things. One, whatever this was, it wasn't isolated. Two, I needed to get out of here fast. I ran through my mental checklist. My go bag was under the floorboards. Food, water, maps, flint, first aid kit, a multi-tool, and a small handgun with extra rounds. I always kept it ready. Not for something like this, but still, just in case. I yanked up the trapdoor and pulled the bag free. My hands were steady, but my heart was hammering. I threw on a thick jacket, laced my boots, and slung the pack over my shoulders. Outside, the groaning had grown closer. I crept toward the back door, listening for movement. My cabin is surrounded by a natural perimeter of rocky outcroppings and dense brush, hard for any creature to move through silently, but I could hear the crunch of branches and the occasional sickening squelch of something wet dragging across the forest floor. The plan was simple. Get to the ridge, scan the valley, find out how far this thing had spread. If I could make it to the ranger station 3 miles west, maybe I'd find answers. Maybe even help. I slipped out the back, staying low, knife in hand. The cold air bit at my face and my breath came out in thin plumes that vanished too quickly. I stuck to the shadows, weaving between trees, following a trail only I knew by heart. But after 50 paces I froze. There were more of them. 3, maybe 4, shambling through the woods, moving in broken jerks like puppets on tangled strings. They didn't seem to notice me, not yet. but one of them turned its head in my direction and sniffed the air. The flesh on its face peeled back to reveal teeth that looked too long in the moonlight. I backed away slowly. Every step felt like thunder on dry leaves. I couldn't go to the ranger station, not now. Not with that many of them nearby. I needed to go deeper. There's a cave system about a mile from my cabin, hidden behind a rockfall. I'd used it for storage before. Dry goods, spare gear, sometimes just to get out of the snowstorms in winter. It wasn't ideal, but it was defensible, and right now, that meant everything. I changed course, cutting through a ravine and climbing a ridge by the light of the fading moon. The groaning faded behind me, but not entirely. They were still out there, always searching, always sniffing. Something terrible had reached the world, and it had started walking. And I was no longer alone in the wild. The first streaks of daylight broke over the ridgeline as I reached the cave entrance. Light usually brings comfort in the wild, reveals dangers, keeps nocturnal predators away. But that morning, the sunlight felt distant, like it couldn't touch the nightmare creeping through the woods behind me. I slipped between the fallen boulders and into the shadows of the cave, my back pressed to cool stone. I listened. No footsteps. No moaning. Just the drip of water deeper in the cavern and my own breath, finally slowing. The entrance was narrow, easy to defend, and the interior opened up into a larger space where I'd stashed some supplies over the years. Tarps, rope, canned food, even a few solar-powered lanterns. I lit one and hung it on a nail embedded in the wall. Soft amber light pushed the darkness back just enough. I exhaled and allowed myself to rest for the first time in what felt like forever. But rest couldn't last. I needed information. I pulled my radio from my bag again and turned it on. Static. I adjusted the frequency, tried the emergency channels. More static. Then, finally, a voice. Repeat, do not approach infected individuals. They are considered extremely dangerous. Containment efforts have failed in multiple regions. If you are in a remote area, shelter in place. I say again, shelter in place. Then more static. My stomach turned. Infected. That word brought no comfort. Whatever was out there wasn't just wild. It was spreading. Fast. And if containment had failed in multiple regions, then the outbreak wasn't local. I thought about the people in town, about the old man who ran the general store, the mechanic with a lazy eye and a heart of gold. Had they heard the warning, or had the thing reached them before the signal ever did? I opened one of the cans, forcing myself to eat. I needed the energy. My body worked like a machine out here, conditioned by years of discipline, but I knew I'd hit my limits soon if I didn't replenish. By 7 a.m., I had a plan. I'd stay in the cave for another hour, then climb the north slope above the tree line. From there, I could see down into the nearest valley. If the outbreak had reached that far, I'd know it by the smoke, movement, or worse. I packed light, taking only binoculars, my knife, a hatchet, and a flask of water. The slope was steep, but I'd climbed it dozens of times. My boots bit into the frozen moss and I moved like a shadow between the pines. The forest was still wrong, quiet, tense, like it was holding its breath. Then I saw it. The valley below used to be serene. A river wound through it like a silver thread, and a small hunting lodge sat near its edge. Smoke was rising from it, but not chimney smoke. This was darker, thicker, climbing into the sky like a warning flare. Through the binoculars, I saw figures moving around the lodge. Not walking, staggering. One of them was crawling with both legs dragging behind like broken sticks. Another slammed its body against the door again and again, leaving red smears behind. But the worst part was the sound. Even from this distance I could hear them, groans that carried across the open valley. Painful, hungry. Something moved inside the lodge. Someone was still alive in there. I dropped the binoculars and backed away from the edge. I couldn't help them, not alone. If I tried to reach them, I'd be risking everything. But if I stayed put, I'd have to live with the weight of knowing I left someone behind. My whole life, I've trained for survival, tracking, hunting, building, escaping, but I never trained for this. I never trained for a world where humanity itself was turning into a predator. By 8 a.m., the smoke from the lodge had stopped. Not because the fire was out, because the lodge was gone. The roof had caved in. One wall had collapsed. The crawling one was still there, still dragging its body in endless loops near the rubble. I turned and hiked back toward the cave. I passed animal tracks along the trail, scattered, panicked. Even the wolves were running. Something unnatural was creeping through the wilderness, twisting the balance, poisoning everything. I reached the cave again and pulled a camouflaged tarp over the entrance. Inside, I sat against the rock and listened to the dripping water again. This time, it didn't calm me. I kept thinking about the word the radio had used. Infected. Not gone, not ended. Changed. Which meant, maybe, they could change others. Maybe, just one bite, one scratch, I forced the thought away. I needed a longer-term strategy. Staying put would work for a day, maybe two. But if the infected followed the scent of animals, or smoke, or sound, they could find me. I needed higher ground, maybe even an old fire tower if one was still standing. I opened my map, traced the routes I'd traveled hundreds of times. There, Canyon Bluff Fire Tower. About 6 miles west, mostly uphill, through heavy forest. If I moved fast and careful, I could make it before nightfall. But nightfall now came with a cost. I doused the lantern, rested for 20 more minutes, then packed my bag again. The cave had kept me alive for a few hours, but it wouldn't be a haven forever. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about staying one step ahead of something the world had no name for. By 9 a.m., I was on the move again. Every step westward took me deeper into unfamiliar danger, though the path itself was one I knew well, at least before the world changed. The trail to Canyon Bluff Fire Tower wasn't marked on any map the public had access to. It twisted through dense pine and overgrown brush, following the natural terrain. I'd carved it over years of scouting, hunting, and exploring, and it had always felt like mine alone. Now, every rustle in the undergrowth made me pause. I moved low and quiet, using animal paths when I could, doubling back once to avoid a clearing that didn't feel right. I could sense something was off. The birds were gone, the insects silent. Even the squirrels had vanished. That was when I found the first body. It lay slumped against a tree trunk, wearing what used to be a ranger's uniform. His face was pale, mouth open, eyes frozen in a wide stare like he'd seen something he couldn't process. His side had been torn open, clean through. Whatever did, that wasn't just mindless, it was strong. I knelt beside him, checked for a pulse even though I knew better. He was long gone, but something about his posture made me freeze. His hand still gripped his radio. I gently pried it loose. The screen was cracked, but the power light blinked faintly. I pressed the button and spoke in a whisper. "This is a civilian. I'm in the northern Montana region near Canyon Bluff. I've encountered what I believe are infected individuals. If anyone's out there, respond." I waited, nothing. Then a faint crackle. "Copy that, signal weak, stay put if possible. Avoid contact." Then static swallowed the rest. But someone was out there, somewhere. I pocketed the radio and stood, glancing around once more. No movement. Stillness pressed in like fog. I left the ranger's body where it lay and pushed on. By 10:30 a.m., I reached a small stream that cut through a rocky ravine. Normally, it would be teeming with birds and insects, but it too was silent. I knelt to refill my canteen, watching the water closely. It was clear, cold, untainted. At least the land hadn't completely turned against me, yet. I stood up and paused. Something was watching me. I couldn't see it, I couldn't hear it, but I felt it. It's a sensation you learn after years in the wild. A prickle on the back of the neck, a shift in the wind, a pause in the usual rhythm of nature. I turned slowly, eyes scanning the tree line. Then I saw it. Movement. Just beyond the ridge, something ducked behind a tree. I crouched low, drew my knife, and crept uphill, boots pressing into moss and dirt with careful precision. As I crested the ridge, I expected another one of those twisted creatures. Instead, I saw a person, or at least I thought I did. He was crouched low, dressed in torn hiking clothes, arms covered in scratches. His skin was pale, his eyes wide with fear. He looked human, but he was shivering, twitching slightly like something inside him was fighting to stay still. "Hey," I called softly, not moving closer. "Are you hurt?" He turned his head sharply toward me and I saw it. His pupils were blown wide, almost overtaking his eyes. His mouth opened, but no words came out, just a gurgling sound. I stepped back. "Hey, easy." He stood, wobbling, limbs jerking unnaturally. Then he lunged. I dodged, ducked low, and swept his legs out from under him. He hit the ground hard, but didn't seem to feel it. He thrashed, arms flailing toward me, nails clawing at the dirt. I didn't want to hurt him, not if there was still something human left, but he was past that point. I pinned him down and saw the bite on his neck. Fresh, ragged, infected. I did the only thing I could. I ran. Not because I was scared, but because I couldn't afford to waste time or energy. I heard him scrambling after me for a moment, then crashing back into the underbrush like a broken puppet. I didn't stop until the fire tower came into view. It stood tall above the trees. A skeleton of steel and weathered wood, half wrapped in mist. I'd last visited it 2 summers ago to replace a weather sensor. Back then, it had felt like a peaceful outpost. Now, it looked like a last hope. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, ears alert for anything below. When I reached the top, I slammed the hatch shut behind me and secured it with a metal rod. The room was small, but dry, with windows on all sides and a desk in the center. There was even an old emergency box tucked beneath the counter. I opened it. Inside was a flare gun, a pair of binoculars, and a sealed first aid kit. I scanned the horizon. To the east, smoke still rose from the hunting lodge. To the south, I saw movement. Slow figures drifting through the trees in groups of 2s and 3s. To the north, nothing. That gave me options. I sat down and finally let myself breathe again. But not for long. Because something began to thump against the base of the tower. I looked down. They'd followed me. 4 of them. Maybe 5. All staring upward, arms twitching, faces slack. One of them began to climb the lower rungs of the ladder, jerking up each step like it didn't quite understand how ladders worked, but learning fast. The sun was almost at its peak, and the first 12 hours weren't over yet. The first one started climbing with that strange, jerking rhythm, like a toddler learning stairs but powered by something deeper than instinct. I grabbed the flare gun from the emergency kit and checked the single round inside. It wasn't meant for this kind of threat. It was a signal, nothing more, but a direct hit could still buy me time. The infected man, once a hiker maybe, reached halfway up the ladder. I stepped to the edge of the hatch, aimed down, and fired. The flare hit him square in the chest. A burst of red flame erupted as he tumbled backward, flailing. He hit the others below with a loud thud, limbs folding in awkward directions. The light and fire stunned them for a moment. They staggered back, one of them shielding its face like it remembered pain. I didn't waste the opportunity. I slammed the hatch shut again and shoved a filing cabinet over it for good measure. The wind howled across the treetops, rattling the old wooden frame. I backed away and scanned the tower's small interior. There were dusty maps, a broken compass, and an old shortwave radio bolted to the wall. The radio's power light was off. Dead. I found a small crank-powered generator beneath the bench and connected it. I began turning the handle, slowly at first, then faster. My shoulder ached from the repetition, but after a minute the radio blinked to life. A burst of static filled the air. I adjusted the dial, sweeping across bands. Nothing. More static. Then a voice, fragmented, distant, but real. Emergency. Northern sectors compromised. If you can hear this, head west. Repeat, head west. The signal cut out. That was all I needed. Head west. At least someone was still out there. Maybe the military, maybe local rescue teams. But I couldn't rely on rescue. I knew how to survive off the grid. I just needed to avoid being cornered. The hatch below thudded again. They were still out there, waiting, learning. By 11:30 a.m., the tower began to groan under shifting weight. One of them had tried climbing again. I peered out the side window and saw him gripping a support beam, pulling himself up like a spider. Not human. Not anymore. I couldn't stay. I needed a plan. I grabbed the binoculars and scanned the terrain. To the west, past the river, I spotted what looked like a ranger outpost, just a shadow in the trees, but it was the right shape. I knew that cabin. I'd helped build it with a buddy 10 years ago. It had a reinforced door and emergency supplies. But it was nearly 2 miles away, through dense forest, now crawling with the infected. No time to hesitate. I fashioned a rope from paracord and old gear straps in the tower's storage bin. I tied off one end to a support beam and tossed the other out the window. It dangled 30 feet down, swaying just above the underbrush. Below, the infected still circled like vultures. One of them sniffed the air, then looked up toward me. I waited. Breathed. Then I moved. I climbed out, gripped the rope, and slid down fast. My hands burned. I dropped the last 5 feet and rolled into the dirt, knife in hand, backpack slung tight. The moment I landed, they reacted. Yelping, screeching, a chorus of inhuman cries. I ran. I didn't waste time looking back. My boots pounded the earth as I zigzagged between trees, vaulting over logs, ducking beneath low branches. I could hear them behind me, feet scraping against roots, wheezing breaths that weren't quite natural. By 11:45 a.m., I reached the ravine again. The narrow stream cut a path between rocky banks, maybe 15 feet wide. I leapt without thinking. My foot caught the edge, slipped. I fell, hard, into shallow water and sharp stones. Pain shot up my leg as my ankle twisted beneath me. I gritted my teeth, rolled to the side, and crawled behind a boulder. Water soaked my gear, chilled my skin. I drew my knife and waited. 2 of them appeared at the top of the ravine, sniffing, twitching. One stepped forward, stumbled on a loose rock, and tumbled down. It landed on a jagged stone and didn't get back up. The others stayed at the edge watching. It didn't climb down. It didn't move. It just stood there, staring. I waited. 10 seconds, 20. Then it turned and wandered off. Not stupid, not blind. They were learning. I forced myself up, limping slightly, and followed the ravine west. It was slower, but the banks offered some cover. I moved through cold water and mud, branches catching on my clothes. By the time I climbed out of the ravine and spotted the ranger cabin, it was close to noon. I'd survived nearly 12 hours. But the last stretch, that would be the most dangerous of all. I crept up the slope toward the ranger cabin, keeping low and quiet. The trees thinned here, but the underbrush was still dense enough to hide me if I moved carefully. I took it slow, each step deliberate, every sound noted. The cabin was built on stilts, 4 feet off the ground to keep snow and animals out during winter. A short staircase led to a reinforced door with a sliding hatch for visibility. I'd helped design it to withstand bears. Hopefully, it would hold up against what was out there now. As I approached, I scanned the perimeter. No movement, no noise except the wind in the trees. The world felt like it was holding its breath. I reached the stairs and ascended slowly, every creak of the wood setting my nerves on edge. I reached the door, raised the metal latch, and slipped inside. The air was dry and dusty. A wood stove sat in the corner. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with canned food, first aid kits, rope, matches, and old field gear. It was a survivalist's dream, and exactly what I needed. I shut the door behind me and locked it. Then I dragged a heavy storage trunk in front of it for good measure. Only then did I allow myself to breathe deeply. 12 hours. It had felt like days. I took inventory quickly. There were 5 cans of stew, 3 bottles of water, and a crate of old flares. I even found a functioning CB radio, outdated, but it hummed with life. I turned the dial slowly, crackles, hisses, silence. Then, evacuation point, Echo Ridge, 2 hours until lockdown. Repeat Echo Ridge, 2 hours. I froze. Echo Ridge was nearly 10 miles west, just past the old wildfire line. That gave me a destination, but not much time. I sat on the cot, lifted my pant leg, and checked the ankle I'd twisted in the ravine. It was swollen and stiff, but not broken. I wrapped it with a spare bandage and elevated it. Outside, the wind picked up. I moved to the window, peering through the slats. Something shifted at the edge of the trees. A figure, standing still, watching. I moved away from the window, heart pounding. They were tracking me, not by scent, not by sound. They remembered. I'd drawn attention by escaping the tower. Now they were looking for me. The cabin wouldn't hold forever. I needed to keep moving. But the pain in my ankle said otherwise. I paced, thinking through every possible route. If I stuck to the old firebreak trails, I could shave time off the trip to Echo Ridge. But they were exposed, open terrain, easy to get spotted. The denser forest would take longer but offered more cover. Either way, I couldn't do it at a full sprint. I'd have to plan carefully, move with precision, make every step count. I grabbed a flare, a knife, and what food I could carry. I found a canvas satchel beneath the cot and stuffed it with supplies. Then I spotted something tucked behind a tool chest, a small hatchet, sharpened and oiled. Perfect. By 12:20 p.m., I'd geared up, checked the window again, clear, and unlocked the door. I stepped out and froze. There was a figure in the clearing, but this one wasn't infected. She was standing straight, eyes scanning the treetops, a rifle slung over her shoulder. She looked lean, strong, dressed in forest green with a torn ranger patch on her arm. I called out softly. She whipped around, rifle raised. "Easy," I said, raising my hands. "I'm not one of them." She studied me for a long second, then lowered her weapon. "You were in the tower," she said. "I saw the flare." I nodded. "Heard the Echo Ridge transmission?" She nodded back. "I'm heading there." "Then we go together." She hesitated. "You slowed down. I leave you behind." "Fair enough," I said. We moved quickly into the trees, sticking to the shadows. Her name was Riley, former Firewatch. She'd been on solo patrol when it all started, and she'd seen her entire team get overrun in under an hour. "They don't stop," she said as we walked. "They don't rest. It's like they're just waiting for orders." "From who?" I asked. She shrugged. "No one, maybe everyone." At 12:30 p.m., we passed the body of a moose, its side torn open, eyes wide in horror. It hadn't even been eaten, just destroyed. "This isn't survival," Riley muttered. "This is something else." We pressed on, taking a narrow deer path that curved through the foothills. Birds began to sing again, a strange contrast to the horror we'd left behind. But it gave me hope. The forest wasn't dead. Not yet. We had 90 minutes left. And the hardest part still lay ahead. By 12:35 p.m., we'd crossed over into the old burn zone, charred trees standing like black skeletons against the afternoon sun. This area had been hit by wildfire 3 summers ago. Little had regrown. No cover, no shadows, just scorched earth and ash. It was the fastest way to Echo Ridge, and the most dangerous. Riley and I crouched behind a half-fallen tree, scanning the horizon. In the distance, the ridgeline marked the edge of the forest. Just beyond that, Echo Ridge Lookout stood like a lone sentinel. But between us and safety, there was open terrain. I adjusted the strap on my satchel and glanced at her. "We make a run for it." She shook her head. "Not yet." Then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping. Not footsteps, not wind. It was drumming. We turned slowly and saw them, figures walking along the blackened trail. 6 of them, moving in unison. Not sprinting, not hunting, just patrolling, like they owned it now. "They're watching the trails," I whispered, "like they're expecting someone." "They are," Riley said. "Us." We waited until they passed. Then we dropped low and moved behind the ridgeline, staying just out of sight. Every 20 steps we stopped and listened. No breathing, no crunch of ash. We reached a dip in the terrain where an old animal den had collapsed into a shallow trench. It was just big enough to hide in. We ducked inside and pressed close to the soil and waited. Minutes passed. At 12:50 p.m., a noise broke the silence. A single scream, far off, echoing across the charred landscape. Not an animal, a person, and not just pain. It sounded like warning. I started to move, but Riley grabbed my arm. "Don't, that's bait." "What?" "They're using it, trying to draw people out." The scream came again, then another voice. 2, maybe 3 people, pleading, panicked. But no gunfire, no fighting. It didn't make sense. Until I saw them. 4 of the infected, carrying something. No someone. A person, bound, barely conscious, held aloft like cargo. My blood ran cold. They weren't just chasing anymore. They were taking prisoners. Why? I couldn't dwell on it. If we waited too long, we'd miss the evacuation. And I wasn't going to waste the one shot we had trying to fight whatever this was becoming. We waited until the patrol had moved out of view. Then we climbed from the trench and broke into a fast jog, cutting across the last stretch of open land. The sun was burning hot, and every shadow looked like it could hide something. My ankles screamed with each step, but I forced myself forward. Riley moved ahead, rifle sweeping from side to side, Then a sharp whistle cut through the silence. She spun and fired. One of them was behind us, fast, lean, and silent, until it wasn't. Her shot hit it square in the chest, but it didn't fall. It lunged. I stepped between them, swinging the hatchet with everything I had. It struck deep. The creature shuddered, then dropped. Riley grabbed my arm. "Move!" We crested the ridge at 1:10 p.m., lungs burning, hearts pounding. Below us, Echo Ridge stood tall, a reinforced outpost surrounded by sandbags and solar panels. Floodlights had been rigged around the perimeter, and a wind turbine spun lazily above the roof. A man in uniform stood at the gate, waving. "We've got survivors," he shouted. Riley smiled for the first time all day. We descended the slope fast, cutting through wild scrub and broken fence posts. But just before we reached the gate, we heard a sound I'd hoped never to hear again. A distant horn, long, deep. Answering cries echoed through the forest behind us. Not one or two, dozens. The infected had found us. I turned to the soldier. "How long until lockdown?" He didn't blink. 10 minutes. Riley and I exchanged a look. We'd made it. Almost. But the gate wouldn't stay open long. We dove through just as the first shapes crested the hill. Dozens of them, some sprinting, others crawling, all hungry for whatever they thought we were. The gate slammed shut behind us. Heavy bolts locked in place. I fell to my knees, exhausted, bleeding from a dozen cuts. Riley stood over me, rifle still raised. And above us, a siren blared. Lockdown initiated. The world outside was gone. And the nightmare? It wasn't over. Not yet. By 1:15 p.m., we were inside the compound, breathing hard and drenched in sweat. The metal gate behind us trembled as something slammed against it from the other side again and again, until the steel groaned like it might give out. But it didn't. For now. The soldier who'd let us in introduced himself as Corporal Hayes. Early 30s, sharp eyes, calm voice. He led us through a narrow corridor of concrete barriers and reinforced doors, deeper into the outpost. There were others inside, about a dozen survivors. Some wore ranger uniforms. Others looked like hikers or travelers who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Every face was pale, hollow. No one had slept. No one had eaten enough. Everyone was waiting for what came next. The place wasn't meant to be permanent. Echo Ridge had always been a monitoring station, one built with emergencies in mind. It had solar power, water catchment, and emergency rations. But this was different. "They'll break in eventually," Hayes said, handing me a bottle of water. "They're learning, changing." "Yeah," I muttered, "we noticed." I sat on a folding chair in a corner of the command room, unwrapped my ankle, and replaced the bandage. The swelling had gone down slightly, but it still hurt like nothing else. Riley stood by the window, watching the tree line through binoculars. "They're not just banging on the gate," she said. "They're surrounding us, cutting off escape routes." Hayes nodded. "It's happening everywhere." He turned to a corkboard lined with printed maps, all marked with red pins. Every town nearby went dark within the first hour. Power grids down, phones offline, no satellite signals, no help coming. He looked at me. "You said you were in the watchtower this morning?" I nodded. "Since 4 a.m. Everything was fine until 7:03. He raised an eyebrow. "Not 7 o'clock?" "No," I said. "Exactly 7:03. That's when the first bird dropped from the sky." His expression tightened. "That matches," he said. "All reports say the same. Different locations, same moment. It was like a switch flipped." We all sat in silence for a while after that. At 1:30 p.m., a low drone hummed through the outpost, an automated system beginning its lockdown sequence. Steel shutters closed over the windows. Lights dimmed to emergency levels. Even the air seemed to still. We were inside a bunker now. Safe, but trapped. Hayes gathered everyone in the main room. "Listen up," he said. "The infected are swarming the base. We don't know how they're coordinating, but they are. This place is secure, for now, but we don't know for how long. Our orders are to hold out until evacuation, which may come in 24 hours, maybe more." A murmur spread through the group. Someone asked, "What if they get in?" Hayes looked at Riley, then at me. "They won't." But I could hear it in his voice. He wasn't sure. At 1:45 p.m., Riley and I took shifts on lookout. We climbed to the second-floor deck, an exposed platform that overlooked the approach road. From up there, I could see just how bad it was. They were everywhere. Dozens, maybe hundreds. All gathered silently in the trees, not moaning, not screaming, just standing, like they were waiting. Then, just before 2 p.m., one of them stepped forward. A tall figure with sunken eyes and dark veins running down his neck. He raised one arm and pointed at the outpost. No sound, no movement, just that single gesture. And then they all turned and walked away. Not ran, walked, disappearing into the forest like mist. Riley lowered her rifle slowly. "What the?" I didn't have an answer. Neither did Hayes. We stayed quiet until the last one vanished. Then the siren sounded again, shorter this time. Phase 2 initiated. The command panel lit up. An automated voice played over the loudspeaker. "Hold for further instructions. Countdown initiated. 4 hours to relocation drop." Hayes exhaled hard. "They're coming for us." "But why would the infected just leave?" Riley asked. I thought of the scream we'd heard, the prisoner, the patrols, the horn. "They don't need this place anymore," I said slowly. "They already got what they came for." She stared at me. "And what's that?" I looked toward the tree line, which now stood empty and still. Us. At 2:05 p.m., Echo Ridge went eerily still. No moaning, no footsteps, no slamming on the walls or scraping at the gate. The trees around the outpost swayed gently in the wind, their limbs whispering to each other as if the entire forest was holding its breath. It felt wrong. Too quiet. Hayes ran a systems check. All shutters sealed, perimeter clear, still no signal from Central Command. The countdown timer on the wall showed just under 4 hours until relocation drop. If we were lucky, a helicopter would arrive. If we weren't, Riley leaned on the railing, eyes scanning the horizon. What if they don't come? What if this is it? I didn't answer. I didn't want to admit what I was thinking. That maybe the evacuation was never real. That maybe this outpost, like the others, had just been meant to delay the inevitable. At 2:20 p.m., a high-pitched beep interrupted the silence. One of the radios crackled to life. "Echo Ridge, come in. Echo Ridge, respond." Hayes lunged for the receiver. "This is Corporal Hayes at Echo Ridge. We are secured with 13 survivors. Request immediate extraction." Static. Then a voice returned. Calm. Female. "Confirmed. Relocation window will open at 6 p.m. Extraction protocol, rooftop. Signal beacon must be activated before window closes. You will have 5 minutes." The line went dead. No coordinates, no call sign, no identification, just instructions. Hayes looked shaken. "We only get one shot at this." He pulled out a dusty metal case from a locked cabinet. Inside was a compact device, no bigger than a lunchbox, with a red button in the center. "Signal beacon," he said. "Military grade. Once it's live, it can't be moved or reset." "What happens if we press it early?" Riley asked. "They'll home in on the signal, but not just our people. Everything else out there might come running too." So we waited. Every hour felt like a coin toss. At 3:30 p.m., we lost power. The lights flickered out. The fans stopped spinning. Even the emergency displays dimmed to black. Hayes slammed to the console. "The solar system's fine. We're being jammed." "How?" I asked. "This is a wilderness outpost." He didn't answer. The tension inside the outpost was sharp enough to cut through. No one spoke unless they had to. Most people sat close together, weapons in their laps, staring at the clock. At 5 p.m., the ground began to shake. Just a little. Barely enough to notice. But I felt it. So did Riley. "Not an earthquake," I muttered. "That's movement." Hayes ran outside to the upper deck. I followed, limping now, every step pulsing through my leg like fire. What we saw wasn't a horde. It was something else. Shapes moving through the forest, large, fast, coordinated. They weren't stumbling or lurching. They were circling, organizing. And at their center, something taller, something that moved like a leader. Hayes stared through his binoculars and whispered, "They've evolved." At 5:45 p.m., we gathered on the rooftop. The beacon was armed. The survivors lined up along the landing pad. I helped a wounded ranger onto a stretcher and braced the tripod holding the flare gun. Riley stood beside me, one hand on her rifle, the other gripping the flare. Hayes checked his watch. Wait for 6. Not a second before. Below, the forest rippled. A low, droning hum rose from the trees. Not mechanical, organic, a sound that vibrated in your bones. At 5:58 p.m., we saw movement. Hundreds of them, breaking through the brush in perfect unison, coming from every direction. Faster than before, smarter. The gate began to buckle. Metal screeched and groaned. Then 6:0 p.m., Riley fired the flare. The sky lit up in red. Hayes pressed the beacon. It began to pulse with a steady blue light, beeping like a heartbeat. The creatures outside screamed. An unnatural, inhuman wail that sent everyone scrambling to the center of the rooftop. The first one hit the outer fence, then the second, then the third. By 6:02 p.m., the perimeter was swarmed. They climbed over each other, clawing toward the roof like ants toward honey. Gunfire erupted all around. I swung my hatchet once, twice, backing against a steel vent as shadows leapt through the smoke. A spotlight beamed down from above, then another, a helicopter. Massive, loud, wind roaring from its rotors. It hovered over the platform, side door open, armed guards inside. A rope ladder dropped. "Go!" Hayes shouted. "Everyone move!" We lifted the wounded first, then the civilians. Riley went up ahead of me, covering the rear with her rifle. By the time I reached the ladder, the rooftop was a storm of movement. Gunfire, screams, roaring wind. One of the infected reached the edge and lunged. Hayes grabbed him midair and threw him down. "Climb," he yelled at me. I climbed. The ladder swung wildly as the chopper began to ascend. Below, the outpost was lost in chaos, walls buckling, flames spreading, the infected flooding every corner. Hayes was the last to grab the rope. At 6:06 p.m., Echo Ridge vanished beneath a cloud of smoke and falling ash. We flew north, into the mountains. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Riley turned to me. We survived. I looked down at the forest, now far below. The nightmare wasn't over, not by a long shot. But she was right. We'd made it through the first 12 hours. And that was more than most. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.